$50,000 for fishing? That's the fine that showed up on our doorstep after my brilliant environmental scientist wife Sarah cast her first line into the lake she actually helped restore. The HOA president Karen stood there with her fake smile, calling it protecting our community standards, while using language that made it crystal clear what she really meant by "those people don't belong here." But here's what this racist HOA Karen didn't know. Sarah wasn't just any environmental scientist. She was the lead consultant who designed this entire lake restoration project. And while Karen was busy forging documents and filing bogus complaints, she had no idea we were about to discover something that would flip her perfect little world upside down. The lake she claimed to own? She'd been lying about that for 30 years. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment, because this revenge story will restore your faith in justice. And if you believe no HOA should ever get away with targeting families like this, hit subscribe, because when the receipts finally drop, you're going to want to see every single page. I thought moving back to Willowbrook Estates would be like coming home. This was the neighborhood where I grew up, where I rode my bike down these same tree-lined streets and spent summers swimming in the crystal-clear lake that made this place special. Now, 6 months into marriage with Sarah, I figured it was the perfect spot to start our life together. The houses were beautiful, the HOA kept everything pristine, and Sarah could use her environmental science background to maybe help with some conservation projects around the lake. What could go wrong? Sarah fell in love with the place the moment we signed the papers. She'd wake up at sunrise, grab her fishing gear, and head down to the lake for an hour of peace before starting her day at the county environmental office. She'd been the lead consultant on the lake's restoration project 3 years back, so she knew every inch of that water. Watching her cast her line from our back deck while the morning mist rolled off the surface was like something out of a postcard. She looked so content, so at home. I should have known it was too good to last. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning in late September. Sarah had been out fishing for about 30 minutes when I saw Karen Blackwood walking down from the main clubhouse. Karen was our HOA president, a woman in her early 50s, with perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of smile that never quite reached her eyes. She always dressed like she was heading to some important business meeting, even when she was just patrolling the neighborhood looking for code violations. I'd known Karen since I was a kid. She'd been the type who always tattled on other kids for minor playground infractions. Some people never change. I watched from the kitchen window as Karen approached Sarah at the water's edge. Even from a distance, I could see that fake smile plastered on her face as she gestured toward Sarah's fishing rod. The conversation looked friendly enough, but something about Karen's body language put me on edge. She kept pointing at various spots around the lake, like she was explaining something official. Sarah nodded politely, probably assuming Karen was just being welcoming to the new neighbors. When Sarah came back inside 20 minutes later, she looked confused. "That woman from the HOA came by," she said, setting her tackle box on the kitchen counter. She mentioned something about new fishing regulations and asked if I was familiar with all the community guidelines. She seemed intense. Sarah shrugged it off, but I noticed she kept glancing toward the lake like she was replaying the conversation in her head. "What kind of fishing regulations?" I asked. I'd been fishing in that lake since I was 8 years old. There had never been any special rules beyond basic common sense. She said they'd recently updated the policies about lake access and usage times, something about protecting the ecosystem and making sure only authorized residents were using the facilities. Sarah started making coffee, but I could tell the interaction had rattled her. She kept emphasizing the word authorized, like I might not understand what it meant. That afternoon, I was working from home when the doorbell rang. A man in a clipboard uniform stood on our porch with an official-looking envelope. "Citation delivery for the Williams residence," he said, like he was serving a warrant. The envelope was thick, with the HOA letterhead embossed in gold. Inside was a formal complaint form, filled out in neat handwriting, alleging unauthorized lake access by non-residents and citing specific times and dates, all matching exactly when Sarah had been fishing. The complaint was anonymous, but whoever filed it had been watching Sarah closely. They knew she fished at sunrise. They knew she preferred the north side of the lake. They even knew what color tackle box she used. What made my blood boil was the language in the description section. Individual appears to be from outside the community demographic and may not understand our established protocols. The racism wasn't even subtle. I called Karen immediately. Her secretary said she was in meetings all afternoon but would get back to me. She never did. That evening, I walked over to the HOA office myself. Karen was there, reorganizing filing cabinets with the same meticulous attention she'd always had. "Marcus, how nice to see you," she said, that same plastic smile appearing instantly. "I heard you might have some questions about our community guidelines." "Karen, there's obviously been some mistake. Sarah's name is on our deed. She lives here. She has every right to use the lake." I showed her the complaint form. Karen barely glanced at it. "Oh, that. Yes, we did receive some concerns from residents about fishing activities. You have to understand, Marcus. We've worked very hard to maintain the character of this neighborhood. When people see unfamiliar faces using our facilities, they naturally want to make sure everything is above board." "Unfamiliar faces?" "Karen, she's my wife." Of course. I'm sure it's just a simple misunderstanding. But you know how important it is to follow proper procedures. We can't have people assuming they can just use our amenities without going through the appropriate channels." The way she said "people" made my skin crawl. I'd heard that tone before, growing up in this same neighborhood. It was the voice of someone who thought they owned not just the property, but the right to decide who belonged there. The next morning, I woke up to find a yellow envelope taped to our front door. Inside was a citation for $500, issued to Sarah Williams for trespassing on community property during unauthorized hours. The violation date was the previous Tuesday, the same morning Karen had approached Sarah at the lake. The citation was signed by Karen herself, with a note at the bottom: "Failure to comply with community standards will result in escalated enforcement measures." Sarah stood in our driveway, reading the citation, her coffee mug trembling slightly in her free hand. "Marcus," she said quietly, "I designed the restoration plan for this lake. I know every fish species, every water quality reading, every environmental regulation that applies here. I wrote half the conservation guidelines they claim I'm violating." That's when I realized this wasn't about fishing regulations or community standards or any of the official-sounding reasons Karen was giving us. This was about making Sarah feel unwelcome. This was about letting us know that no matter what our deed said, no matter how long I'd lived in this neighborhood, some people would never consider Sarah one of us. And Karen Blackwood had just declared war on the wrong family. I spent that entire weekend gathering every document we had: property deed, tax records, homeowner's insurance, even the original purchase agreement from 6 months ago. Everything had Sarah's name right there next to mine. Black ink on white paper. Legal and binding. This had to be some kind of clerical error, maybe a mix-up in the HOA database. Karen would see the paperwork, realize her mistake, and we'd all have a good laugh about it over coffee, right? Monday morning, I walked into the HOA office with a manila folder full of proof. Karen's secretary, a nervous woman named Janet, buzzed me right in. Karen sat behind her mahogany desk, like she was running a Fortune 500 company instead of a suburban homeowners association. She barely glanced at the documents I spread across her desk. "Marcus, I appreciate you taking the time to bring these by. But ownership of property and authorized usage of community amenities are two different things entirely." She spoke like she was explaining basic math to a child. "Your wife may be on the deed, but that doesn't automatically grant her access to all facilities without proper vetting and approval." "Vetting and approval? Karen, what are you talking about? I've been fishing in that lake since I was 8 years old. My dad fished there. My grandfather probably fished there. Times change, Marcus. We have new protocols now. Enhanced security measures. She picked up one of our documents and pretended to study it. I'll need to have our legal team review these before we can make any determinations about your wife's status. That's when I knew this wasn't about paperwork. This was personal. What legal team? Karen, this is a neighborhood HOA, not the Pentagon. I think this meeting is over. She pressed her desk buzzer. Janet, please escort Mr. Williams out. The next day, I tried a different approach. I requested to review the security footage from the lake area. Every decent HOA has cameras these days. And if there was any question about Sarah's activities, the video would clear everything up. Janet called me back within an hour. I'm sorry, Mr. Williams, but the HOA board has decided that releasing security footage would violate the privacy rights of other residents. Mrs. Blackwood says the board takes privacy very seriously. Privacy. The cameras are pointing at a public lake. What privacy? I'm just passing along the message, sir. That afternoon, I was checking our mailbox when our neighbor Tom Brady walked over. Tom lived 3 houses down and had always been friendly enough. He looked nervous, like he was worried someone might see him talking to me. Marcus, I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but I thought you should know. The cameras caught everything last Tuesday morning. Crystal clear footage of your wife fishing peacefully by herself. No violations, no problems, nothing unusual at all. He glanced around before continuing. Karen showed the footage to a few board members. They all said the same thing. There was absolutely nothing wrong with what your wife was doing. Then why won't they release it? Because it proves she's lying about the violation. Look, man, I've lived here 12 years. I've never seen Karen go after anyone like this. Something's got her really wound up. That evening, we got our answer. Another envelope appeared on our door, but this one wasn't from the HOA directly. It was a formal complaint filed with the county zoning office by an anonymous concerned resident. The language was different this time. Uglier, more direct. Whoever wrote it didn't bother hiding behind polite euphemisms. The complaint read, "These people moved into our community 6 months ago and immediately began acting like they owned the place. The woman fishes at our lake every morning like she has some kind of special rights. She's clearly not from around here and doesn't understand how things work in a respectable neighborhood. We pay good money to live among people who share our values, not to have urban elements bringing their different lifestyle to our peaceful community. Something needs to be done before this situation gets worse and property values start dropping." Sarah read it twice, then set it down on our kitchen table without saying a word. I could see her hands shaking slightly. Urban elements. Different lifestyle. These people. The racism wasn't coded anymore. It was right there, in black and white. "They don't even know me," Sarah said finally. "I grew up in the suburbs. I have 2 engineering degrees. I've worked in environmental conservation for 15 years. I helped restore their precious lake, for crying out loud. Sarah, we're going to fight this. We'll get a lawyer. We'll file counter complaints. We'll make them prove every single allegation." She looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, not fear, but something closer to exhaustion. "Marcus, I've been dealing with this my entire career. The questioning looks when I walk into meetings, the requests to see my credentials, the assumptions about my qualifications. I moved here because you said it would be different. You said these people knew you, respected your family." Before I could respond, we heard a car door slam in our driveway. Through the window, I watched a county inspector get out of an official vehicle with a clipboard and measuring tape. He walked straight to our backyard without knocking, heading for the lake. I met him halfway across our lawn. "Excuse me, can I help you?" "Environmental violation inspection. We received a complaint about unauthorized fishing activities, potentially damaging protected wildlife habitats." He showed me his badge and a work order. "I need to assess the situation and document any ecological damage." "What ecological damage?" "My wife catches and releases. She uses barbless hooks. She's an environmental scientist herself." "Sir, I'm just here to do my job. If you could please step back and let me work." I watched him take photos of our dock, our fishing equipment, even the small tackle box Sarah kept by the back door. He spent 20 minutes measuring distances from the water's edge and writing notes. When he finished, he handed me a carbon copy of his report. The findings were devastating. According to his assessment, Sarah's fishing activities had significantly disrupted the lake's delicate ecosystem and posed ongoing threats to protected bass spawning grounds. The recommended fine was $50,000, with immediate cessation of all fishing activities pending further environmental review. But here's what made my blood boil. The report included specific details about fish populations and spawning patterns that were completely wrong. Sarah had designed the original environmental assessment for this lake. She knew every species, every breeding cycle, every water quality measurement. This inspector was either incompetent or lying. That night, Sarah sat at our kitchen table with the bogus environmental report spread out in front of her, making notes in red ink. "Marcus, this is impossible. The report claims there are largemouth bass spawning in October. They spawn in spring. It says the lake contains endangered bluefin tuna. Bluefin tuna live in the ocean, not freshwater lakes. And look at this. They're claiming my fishing damaged coral reefs. There are no coral reefs in Michigan." So the inspector made mistakes. These aren't mistakes. This is either complete fraud, or someone who has never seen a freshwater lake in their life wrote this report. She looked up at me with fire in her eyes for the first time since this whole thing started. "Marcus, they forged an environmental impact assessment. That's a federal crime." The next morning, I woke up to find Karen Blackwood standing in our driveway with 2 police officers and a man in an expensive suit. She was pointing at our house and talking animatedly, like she was reporting a dangerous criminal situation. Through the window, I could see her gesturing toward the lake, toward our fishing equipment, toward Sarah's car in the driveway. One of the officers knocked on our door. "Mr. Williams, we need to speak with your wife about some environmental violations. Can you ask her to step outside, please?" And that's when I realized this wasn't just about driving us out of the neighborhood anymore. Karen Blackwood was trying to destroy my wife's entire life. The police interview lasted 30 minutes and went nowhere. Sarah answered every question professionally, showed them her environmental credentials, and explained exactly why the inspection report was scientifically impossible. The officers seemed uncomfortable by the end, like they were realizing they'd been called out on a wild goose chase. But they still had to file their report, and Karen stood in our driveway the entire time, with that satisfied smile, like she'd won some kind of victory. After they left, I did what I always do when I need answers. I went digging through public records. My background in IT had taught me that every official action leaves a digital paper trail. Government databases, court filings, property records, business licenses. It's all there if you know where to look. And after 20 years of debugging systems and tracking down problems, I knew how to follow a trail. I started with Karen herself. Basic background check, nothing too invasive. What I found made everything click into place. Karen's son Tyler had applied for Sarah's position at the county environmental office 8 months ago. He'd been one of 3 final candidates, and according to the public hiring records I pulled from the county website, he'd been passed over in favor of Sarah. The job posting was still archived. It required a master's degree in environmental science and 5 years of field experience. Tyler had a bachelor's degree in business and 2 years working at his mother's husband's company. But here's where it got interesting. Tyler's resume, which was part of the public application file, listed his work experience at Blackwood Environmental Testing LLC. I'd never heard of that company, so I ran a business license search. The owner was Robert Blackwood, Karen's husband. The company had been incorporated 3 years ago, right around the time the lake restoration project was completed. The same lake restoration project that Sarah had designed. I printed everything out and spread it across our dining room table. Sarah came home from work to find me surrounded by paperwork, like some kind of conspiracy theorist. "What's all this?" "Karen's revenge plot. laid out in black and white. I walked her through what I'd found. Her son applied for your job and didn't get it. Her husband runs an environmental testing company that probably does work for HOAs. And now they're both targeting you with fake environmental violations. Sarah picked up Tyler's resume and studied it. Marcus, I remember this kid. He interviewed terribly. Couldn't answer basic questions about water quality testing or species management. He kept talking about leveraging environmental assets for community value enhancement. She set the paper down and looked at me. You think they're doing this because I got a job her son wanted? I think they're doing this because you're black and you got a job her son wanted. The racism gives them permission to act on the resentment. That evening, I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. Sometimes you learn more by just observing than you do from any database. I'd lived here as a kid, but I was seeing it with different eyes now. How many other non-white families lived in Willowbrook Estates? I started counting. The Mendez family on Oak Street. Carlos was retired military. The Chen family on Maple Drive. Mrs. Chen was always working in her garden. The Johnson family on Pine Lane. They'd moved in about 2 years ago. I knocked on Carlos Mendez's door first. He answered wearing an old army t-shirt and work jeans, and his handshake felt like gripping a steel cable. You're Marcus Williams, right? Moved into the old Henderson place? That's right. Carlos, can I ask you something? Have you had any problems with the HOA? Any unusual citations or complaints? His expression darkened immediately. Come inside. We need to talk. Carlos led me to his kitchen table, which was covered with his own stack of paperwork. HOA violation notices, fines, complaint forms, dozens of them. It started about 6 months ago, he said, right around the time they elected that Blackwood woman as president. Suddenly, my fence was too high. My mailbox was the wrong color. My truck was parked improperly in my own driveway. He showed me citation after citation, all signed by Karen Blackwood. Improper lawn maintenance, $1,500 fine. Unauthorized vehicle storage, $5,800. Violation of architectural guidelines, SD, $2,000. The dates were scattered across the past 6 months, but the handwriting was identical on every single form. Carlos, this is insane. How much have they fined you total? $11,400. My wife wants us to just pay it and keep quiet. But I didn't serve 3 tours in Afghanistan to come home and let some suburban dictator push my family around. I took photos of his citations with my phone. Have you talked to any of the other families? The Chens? The Johnsons? The Johnsons moved out last month. Couldn't handle the stress. Mrs. Chen doesn't speak much English, but her daughter tells me they've been getting citations too. Something about non-conforming garden elements and culturally inappropriate landscaping. What does that even mean? It means she grows vegetables instead of decorative flowers. Karen decided that having a tomato garden in your backyard violates the community aesthetic standards. I walked home with my head spinning. This wasn't just about Sarah and the fishing incident. Karen had been running a systematic harassment campaign against every minority family in the neighborhood. But she'd made one crucial mistake. That she'd targeted an environmental scientist with a husband who knew how to dig up records. The next morning, I paid a visit to Mrs. Chen. Her daughter Linda answered the door and translated for us. Mrs. Chen had been fined for having vegetables in her garden, for hanging laundry on a line instead of using a dryer, and for excessive noise during her morning Tai Chi routine. Total fines, $9,300. My mother worked as an electronics technician for 40 years, Linda explained. She helped design security systems for banks and government buildings. She knows when she's being watched, and she knows when citations are fake. Look at the handwriting on these forms. She laid out her mother's citations next to each other. Every single one was written in the same precise handwriting, even though they were supposedly filed by different anonymous residents. The complaints about noise were filed at exactly 6:30 a.m., on days when Mrs. Chen hadn't even been outside. The citation for improper laundry hanging was dated for a day when it had rained all morning. Linda, would your mother be willing to help us fight this? We have evidence that Karen has been targeting minority families with fake violations. Mrs. Chen spoke to her daughter in Mandarin. Then Linda translated. She says, Karen doesn't know who she's messing with. My mother spent decades installing security systems. She knows how to gather evidence that holds up in court. That afternoon, the three families met in our living room. Carlos brought his stack of citations. Mrs. Chen brought a notebook where she'd been documenting every interaction with HOA representatives, complete with times, dates, and exact quotes. Sarah spread out the fake environmental report and explained exactly why each finding was scientifically impossible. So, what's our next move? Carlos asked. I pulled out my laptop and opened a new spreadsheet. We're going to do what any good IT department does when they find a system bug. We're going to document every single instance, track the patterns, and build an airtight case that proves exactly how the system is broken. Sarah looked over my shoulder as I started entering data. Marcus, there's something else. I've been thinking about that environmental inspector who filed the fake report. His name was on the paperwork. David Chen. No relation to our Mrs. Chen. I looked him up in the State Registry of Certified Environmental Inspectors. And he doesn't exist. There's no David Chen licensed to do environmental assessments in Michigan, which means someone either hired a fake inspector or forged the entire report. Mrs. Chen's daughter Linda translated this for her mother, who immediately began speaking rapidly in Mandarin. Linda's eyes went wide as she listened. What's she saying? I asked. She says she recognizes the signature on your fake environmental report. She's seen it before, on all of our HOA citations. It's the same handwriting, just with a different name signed at the bottom. That's when we realized Karen Blackwood hadn't just been filing fake complaints against minority residents. She'd been forging official government documents to back them up. And in about 2 hours, we were going to have proof that could land her in federal prison. The next morning, I filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the county for all environmental testing contracts over the past 3 years. It took 2 days to get the response, but when it came, it was like finding the missing piece of a puzzle. Blackwood Environmental Testing LLC had been awarded 17 different contracts, worth a total of $340,000, all for HOA communities. All rubber-stamping environmental violations that just happened to target the same type of residents we were dealing with. But here's what really caught my attention. The company's business address was listed as 1247 Willowbrook Drive. That was Karen and Robert's house. They were running a fake environmental testing company out of their garage and using it to legitimize discriminatory HOA enforcement. It was brilliant in its simplicity and completely illegal. Sarah came with me to Carlos's house that evening for our second strategy meeting. This time, Mrs. Chen brought her grandson David, a college kid who was majoring in computer science. The 5 of us, 6 if you counted Linda translating, sat around Carlos's dining room table like we were planning a military operation. Before we go any further, Carlos said, we need to understand how evidence works. I spent 20 years in the Army Corps of Engineers, and I learned that good intentions don't mean anything if your paperwork won't hold up under scrutiny. He pulled out a yellow legal pad and started drawing boxes. Every piece of evidence needs 4 things: authentication, chain of custody, documentation of source, and witness verification. What does that mean in regular English? I asked. It means we can't just take photos of documents and hope that's enough. We need to prove when we found them, where we found them, who was present when we found them, and that nobody altered them between finding them and presenting them in court. Carlos looked around the table. Mrs. Chen, your grandson knows about computer security, right? David nodded. I can set up encrypted file storage and create tamper-proof timestamps for any digital evidence. If someone tries to claim we altered photos or documents, we'll have cryptographic proof showing exactly when they were captured. Mrs. Chen spoke to Linda in Mandarin. Then Linda translated. My grandmother wants to know if anyone has thought about installing security cameras. She says, Karen doesn't know she's dealing with someone who spent 40 years designing surveillance systems for banks. What kind of cameras? Sarah asked. Mrs. Chen pulled out her phone and showed us photos of tiny devices that looked like decorative lawn ornaments. Through Linda, she explained that modern surveillance equipment could be hidden in anything. Fake rocks, birdhouses, garden lights, even artificial flowers. She could set up a monitoring system that would capture every HOA official who came onto our properties. Grandma says the most important thing is audio recording. People lie about what they said, but digital audio with timestamps is almost impossible to fake in court. Carlos made notes on his legal pad. So we have digital evidence, storage, surveillance systems, and document authentication. What about the fake environmental inspector? Can we prove he doesn't exist? I opened my laptop and pulled up the state licensing database. David Chen, Environmental Inspector License Number 7743 EI 2019. According to the database, this guy is certified to do environmental assessments for residential properties. I clicked through to his profile page. Licensed 3 years ago, address listed as 1247 Willowbrook Drive. That's Karen's house, Sarah said. It gets better. Look at the licensing exam scores. I scrolled down to the test results. Perfect scores on every single section. Water quality assessment, species identification, soil contamination analysis. Straight hundreds across the board. Sarah leaned over my shoulder to read the screen. Marcus, this is impossible. I've taken these certification exams. Nobody gets perfect scores on every section. The species identification test alone covers over 400 different plants and animals. Even experienced biologists miss a few questions. David was typing on his own laptop. I'm running a reverse image search on the inspector's photo in the database. He hit enter and waited for the results. Got it. This picture comes from a stock photography website. It's listed as Professional Asian Businessman in Outdoor Setting. Carlos set down his pen and looked around the table. So we have a fake environmental inspector using a stock photo with impossible test scores, registered to Karen Blackwood's home address. And he just happened to file a completely fraudulent report targeting Sarah for environmental violations. There's more, I said. I pulled up the financial records I'd requested from the county. Blackwood Environmental Testing has billed the county $23,000 for environmental assessments in the past year. But here's the thing. All the invoices are signed by Robert Blackwood as company president, and they all list the same fake inspector as doing the fieldwork. Mrs. Chen said something to Linda, who translated, Grandma wants to know if you've checked the other HOA communities where this fake company did work. She thinks if they're running this scam here, they're probably running it everywhere. I spent the next 2 hours calling HOA presidents from the communities listed in Blackwood Environmental's client list. The pattern was identical across all 17 neighborhoods. Environmental violations, targeting minority residents, impossible fines based on fake scientific assessments, the same forged inspector signature on every report. But the best part was that none of these HOA presidents knew about the others. They all thought they were the only ones using Blackwood Environmental Testing. When I mentioned that the inspector was fake and the company was unlicensed, most of them went quiet. A few hung up on me immediately. How much money are we talking about total? Carlos asked. I added up the numbers from all 17 communities. If the pattern holds across all their contracts, Robert and Karen have stolen approximately $340,000 from county environmental funds and collected probably another $200,000 in fraudulent HOA fines. We're looking at more than $500,000 in fraud. Sarah was quiet for a long time, staring at the laptop screen. Finally, she said, Marcus, I need to tell you something. That environmental assessment Karen used to justify the $50,000 fine against me? I didn't just notice that the scientific data was wrong. I wrote the original assessment this fake report was based on. What do you mean? 3 years ago, I did the legitimate environmental survey for Willowbrook Lake as part of the restoration project. I have copies of all my original data, photos, species counts, water quality measurements, everything. This fake report takes my real numbers and changes just enough details to justify violations that never existed. She pulled out her phone and started scrolling through files. Look at this. My original report identified 12 species of fish in the lake. Their fake report lists the same 12 species, but changes the population numbers to make it look like fishing is causing damage. They copied my work and then altered it to frame me. David looked up from his laptop. I've been analyzing the digital signatures on all these environmental reports. They're not just fake, they're lazy fakes. Same PDF template, same fonts, same formatting, across different dates and locations. Whoever made these didn't even bother changing the metadata. I can prove they were all created on the same computer. Mrs. Chen spoke to Linda, who translated with a big smile. Grandma says in her day, when you caught someone stealing, you didn't call the police first. You made sure you had enough evidence to bury them completely. She thinks we're ready for phase 2. What's phase 2? I asked. Carlos grinned and tapped his legal pad. Phase 2 is when we stop playing defense and start playing offense. We've got 47 pieces of documented evidence proving systematic fraud, discrimination, and theft of public funds. Now we're going to make sure Karen and Robert Blackwood face consequences for every single crime they've committed. But as I was packing up my laptop to leave, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Stop digging, or your wife loses more than her fishing privileges. Some people don't belong in nice neighborhoods and need to learn their place. I showed the message to the group. Mrs. Chen looked at it and said something sharp in Mandarin. Linda translated with a worried expression. Grandma says Karen just made her biggest mistake. Now it's not just about the money or the fake documents. Now it's personal. And that's when I realized we weren't just dealing with HOA fraud anymore. We were dealing with someone desperate enough to make threats. Someone who thought they were untouchable. Someone who was about to learn exactly what happens when you target the wrong family. I forwarded that threatening text message to Detective Mike Rodriguez at the county sheriff's office the next morning. Mike had gone to high school with me and knew I wasn't the type to file frivolous complaints. He called me back within 2 hours. Marcus, this is bigger than just your HOA situation. We've been getting complaints about environmental fraud from 3 other counties. Your evidence package might be exactly what we need to open a formal investigation. What kind of complaints? Fake inspection reports, forged environmental assessments, fraudulent billing to municipal governments. Always the same pattern, targeting specific residents with impossible fines, then having those fines legitimized by a company called Blackwood Environmental Testing. That afternoon, Detective Rodriguez came to our house with a forensic accountant and a digital crimes specialist. They spent 4 hours going through our evidence, copying files, and taking statements from Sarah, Carlos, Mrs. Chen, and myself. When they left, Rodriguez shook my hand at the front door. Unofficially, you've handed us one of the cleanest fraud cases I've seen in 15 years. The documentation is perfect, the financial trail is obvious, and the discriminatory pattern is undeniable. Officially, I can't tell you anything about an ongoing investigation. 2 days later, the local newspaper ran a front-page story titled, HOA Environmental Fraud Investigation Targets Willowbrook Estates. The reporter had somehow gotten copies of several fake inspection reports and interviewed residents from 4 different neighborhoods. Karen's photo was right there on the front page, identified as HOA President Karen Blackwood, whose husband owns the environmental testing company at the center of the allegations. That's when everything started moving fast. The county suspended all contracts with Blackwood Environmental Testing, pending the investigation. The state environmental agency announced they were reviewing every assessment the fake company had ever filed. 3 different law firms called me asking if we wanted to join class action lawsuits against the HOA. But the best part was watching the neighborhood turn. Suddenly, residents who'd been quietly supporting Karen's tough enforcement were discovering that the environmental violations they'd been proud of reporting were based on completely fraudulent science. Tom Brady, our neighbor who'd told me about the security footage, knocked on our door with a bottle of wine and an apology. "Marcus, I need to tell you something. I signed one of those anonymous complaints about Sarah's fishing. Karen told me it was about protecting property values, and I believed her. I'm sorry. I was wrong." By the end of the week, we had support from neighbors I'd never even met. People were bringing us casseroles, offering to help with legal expenses, and sharing their own stories about Karen's harassment. Mrs. Patterson from Elm Street told us Karen had tried to get her fined for feeding stray cats. Mr. Singh from Birch Lane said he'd been cited for culturally inappropriate landscaping because he grew curry plants in his garden. The community was finally seeing Karen for what she really was. Not a protector of neighborhood standards, but a petty dictator who'd been using fake environmental science to target anyone she didn't like. Then the bank records came out. Detective Rodriguez called me on a Friday afternoon with news that made everything click into place. "Marcus, we got a warrant for the Blackwoods financial records. You're not going to believe what we found." Robert Blackwood had been depositing county payments for environmental assessments into his personal checking account, then writing checks to himself for consulting fees. Over 3 years, he'd stolen $340,000 in public funds that were supposed to pay for legitimate environmental protection. But that wasn't the worst part. Karen had been using HOA dues to pay her husband's company for fake assessments, then keeping the money when residents paid the resulting fines. She'd collected over $180,000 in fraudulent penalties and never reported a single dollar to the HOA board or the community budget. They were running a perfect scam, Rodriguez explained. Karen identifies residents she wants to harass. Robert creates fake environmental violations to justify massive fines. Residents pay the fines to avoid legal trouble, and the money goes straight into their personal accounts. If you hadn't started digging, they could have kept this going for years. The news story that weekend included copies of bank statements showing the money trail. Karen's photo was on the front page again, this time with the headline, "HOA President Accused of Stealing $180,000 in Fraudulent Fines." By Monday morning, there was a crowd of angry residents outside the HOA office, demanding her resignation. But Karen wasn't going down without a fight. Tuesday morning, I was getting coffee when Sarah called me from her office, crying, "Marcus, you need to come here right now. The FBI just arrested me." I broke every speed limit getting to the county environmental office. The parking lot was full of federal vehicles, and I could see Sarah through the building's front windows, sitting in handcuffs while agents searched her desk. Her coworkers were standing around looking shocked and confused. Agent Patricia Collins met me at the front door. "Mr. Williams, I'm with the FBI Environmental Crime Unit. Your wife has been arrested on federal charges of environmental terrorism, conspiracy to defraud the government, and filing false environmental reports. That's insane. She's the victim here. She's helping you prove the environmental reports were fake. Sir, we have evidence that your wife has been filing fraudulent environmental assessments for 3 years, collecting government payments for fake restoration work, and conspiring with multiple HOA communities to target specific residents with manufactured violations." They let me talk to Sarah for 5 minutes before taking her to federal holding. She was shaking, barely able to speak coherently. "Marcus, they're saying I created all those fake reports. They're saying I'm David Chen, the fake environmental inspector. They have bank records showing payments from Blackwood Environmental Testing going into an account with my name on it." "What account?" "Sarah, we don't have any account with that company." "I don't know. They showed me deposit slips, checks, even copies of contracts with my signature." "Marcus, someone has been using my identity to legitimize all of this fraud, and now the FBI thinks I'm the mastermind." That's when I realized Karen's final play. She hadn't just been running a fraud scheme, she'd been setting up Sarah to take the fall for it. Every fake environmental report, every forged document, every stolen dollar had been designed to make Sarah look like the criminal mastermind, while Karen and Robert played the role of innocent victims. As I watched the FBI agents load my wife into a federal transport vehicle, my phone buzzed with a text from the same unknown number that had threatened us a week earlier. Told you to stop digging. Now your wife learns what happens to people who don't know their place. Some neighborhoods are worth protecting, even if it means destroying the people who don't belong. I screenshot the message and forwarded it to Detective Rodriguez, but I knew it was too late. Karen had played the perfect trap. While we'd been gathering evidence to expose her fraud, she'd been planting evidence to frame Sarah for the entire conspiracy. And now the woman who'd designed the lake restoration project, who'd dedicated her career to environmental protection, who'd never broken a law in her life, was sitting in federal prison charged with being the criminal mastermind behind a $500,000 environmental fraud scheme. Karen Blackwood had just played her ace card, and it looked like she was about to win everything. Sarah's federal public defender was a tired-looking woman named Janet Pierce, who'd been handling environmental crime cases for 12 years. She met with me the day after Sarah's arrest and laid out exactly how bad our situation was. Mr. Williams, your wife is facing 23 federal charges, including conspiracy, fraud, money laundering, and environmental terrorism. If convicted on all counts, she's looking at 45 years in federal prison. But she's innocent. She's the one who helped expose the fraud in the first place. I believe you, but the evidence against her is substantial. Bank records showing payments from Blackwood Environmental Testing into an account bearing her name and social security number. Environmental reports with her forged signature that bilked the government out of hundreds of thousands of dollars. Digital forensics showing the fake reports were created on a computer registered to her county environmental office. I spent the next week maxing out credit cards to hire a private investigator and a white-collar crime attorney. Legal fees were running $3,000 a day, and we'd already burned through our savings just to post the $200,000 bond to get Sarah out of federal holding. Meanwhile, the local newspaper was running daily stories about the environmental terrorist next door, with Sarah's photo on the front page. The worst part was watching our neighborhood turn cold again. People who'd been bringing us casseroles and offering support suddenly crossed the street when they saw us coming. Tom Brady wouldn't make eye contact when I waved. Mrs. Patterson from Elm Street told her kids they weren't allowed to play in our yard anymore. The narrative had shifted from Karen is running a fraud scheme to Sarah was the mastermind all along, and Karen was just another victim. But something was bothering me about the whole setup, and I couldn't let it go. I spent 3 sleepless nights going through every piece of evidence the FBI had against Sarah, looking for inconsistencies. That's when I found it. Buried in the property records I'd pulled months earlier for a completely different reason. I was researching HOA bylaws when I noticed something strange about the lake itself. According to the original property survey from 1987, Willowbrook Lake wasn't actually part of the HOA's common property. The survey showed the lake as State of Michigan Water Resource, designated for public recreational use, with perpetual access rights for all residents. But the current HOA documents listed the lake as private community amenity, restricted to authorized homeowners only. Someone had changed the lake's legal status without updating the official property records. I called Carlos immediately. I need you to look at something. Remember how you said good evidence requires authentication and chain of custody? I think I found the smoking gun, but I need someone with your background to tell me if I'm seeing what I think I'm seeing. Carlos came over that night with Mrs. Chen and her grandson David. I spread out the property records on our dining room table, the original 1987 survey, the current HOA bylaws, and every land ownership document I could find going back 38 years. Look at this, I said, pointing to the original survey. In 1987, the lake was clearly marked as state property, with public access. But look at this HOA document from 1988. I laid out Karen's father-in-law's paperwork claiming ownership of the lake. Harold Blackwood filed a quitclaim deed, transferring the lake from state ownership to private HOA control. But look at the signatures. Carlos studied the document with a magnifying glass. Marcus, this quitclaim deed is signed by someone claiming to be a state land commissioner named William Patterson. But look at the official state directory from 1988. He pulled out a reference book he'd brought from the library. There was no William Patterson working for the Michigan Department of Natural Resources in 1988. This is a forged signature on a fake government document. David was typing on his laptop. I'm running the digital signatures through the same analysis I did on the environmental reports. Give me a few minutes to process the handwriting patterns. He hit enter and waited for the program to run. Got it. The signature on this 1988 quitclaim deed matches the handwriting samples we have from Karen Blackwood. Her family has been forging government documents for 37 years. Mrs. Chen said something in Mandarin, and Linda translated with excitement. Grandma says this means the lake was never legally owned by the HOA at all. Every single violation, every fine, every restriction they've ever imposed was based on a fraudulent claim to property they didn't actually own. I felt like I'd been hit by lightning. So when Karen fined Sarah for fishing, she was fining your wife for using public property that Sarah had every legal right to access. Carlos finished. Not just as a homeowner, but as a Michigan resident using state recreational waters. But how does this help Sarah with the federal charges? I asked. David grinned and pointed to his laptop screen. Because it proves motive. Sarah wasn't part of some environmental fraud conspiracy. She was specifically targeted because her expertise would eventually expose the fake lake ownership. Karen knew that sooner or later, an environmental scientist would realize the HOA's legal claim to the lake was bogus. The next morning, I called Sarah's attorney with our discovery. Janet Pierce listened to everything, asked me to email her copies of all the documents, then called me back 2 hours later with the best news I'd heard in weeks. Marcus, this changes everything. The State Attorney General's office has been looking for a way to challenge fraudulent lake privatizations across Michigan. Your wife's case just became the test case that could return dozens of illegally claimed lakes to public ownership. What does that mean for the federal charges? It means we now have a clear motive for why someone would frame Sarah. She wasn't targeted because she was involved in environmental fraud. She was targeted because her environmental expertise posed a threat to a 37-year-old land theft conspiracy. That afternoon, Janet Pierce filed a motion to dismiss all federal charges against Sarah, based on new evidence of prosecutorial misconduct and planted evidence. The motion included our complete timeline, showing how the Blackwood family had been running fraudulent schemes since 1987, using forged government documents to steal public property, and then targeting anyone who might expose their crimes. But the real breakthrough came when David's computer analysis revealed something that made my blood run cold. The bank account that had been used to frame Sarah, the one showing deposits from Blackwood Environmental Testing, had been opened using a forged copy of Sarah's driver's license and social security card. The account application was signed with Sarah's forged signature and listed Karen Blackwood as an authorized contact. Karen didn't just frame Sarah for the environmental fraud, Janet Pierce explained during our meeting that evening. She committed identity theft, created fraudulent financial accounts, and then used those accounts to make it look like Sarah was the criminal mastermind. This isn't just about HOA violations anymore. We're looking at a sophisticated identity theft and frame-up operation. The FBI reopened their investigation the next morning, but this time with Karen and Robert Blackwood as the primary suspects. Agent Collins called me personally to apologize for the arrest and explain that they'd been working with falsified evidence provided by someone claiming to be a cooperating witness, someone who turned out to be Karen herself. But Karen had one last card to play. That evening, as Sarah and I were finally having dinner together for the first time in 2 weeks, My phone rang. It was Detective Rodriguez, and he sounded grim. "Marcus, I need to tell you something before you hear it on the news. Karen Blackwood disappeared this afternoon. Her house is empty, her car is gone, and she withdrew $340,000 from 7 different bank accounts this morning. The FBI has issued a federal warrant for her arrest, but she's got a 12-hour head start." I looked out our kitchen window toward the Blackwood house. The driveway was empty, the windows were dark, and there was a "for sale by owner" sign stuck in the front yard that hadn't been there that morning. Karen Blackwood had run, and she'd taken every stolen dollar with her. Karen made it exactly 43 hours before the FBI caught her at a casino in Nevada, trying to convert stolen cash into gambling chips. Apparently, she thought she could launder the money through slot machines and withdraw clean winnings. The woman who'd run a sophisticated fraud scheme for 37 years got caught because she didn't understand how modern casino surveillance works. The arrest video went viral on social media. Karen Blackwood, the woman who'd terrorized minority families with fake environmental violations, being dragged out of a casino in handcuffs while screaming about her rights as a tax-paying citizen. The irony was perfect. She'd spent years claiming other people didn't belong in her neighborhood and ended up in federal prison herself. Robert Blackwood was arrested the same day at his brother's house in Ohio. Unlike Karen, he didn't run. He just sat in his driveway waiting for the FBI to show up, with a suitcase full of forged environmental documents and a handwritten confession describing the entire 37-year fraud operation. Robert was done lying, done covering for his wife, and done pretending their fake environmental testing company was anything other than an elaborate scam to steal public money. Sarah's federal charges were dropped with a public apology from the Department of Justice. Agent Collins held a press conference where she explained exactly how Karen had used identity theft and forged evidence to frame an innocent environmental scientist for crimes Karen herself had committed. "The FBI offered to pay our legal expenses as compensation for the wrongful arrest, but Sarah had a better idea. I want to donate the money to create a legal defense fund for other families who've been targeted by HOA fraud," Sarah told the reporters. "No one should have to choose between fighting discriminatory fines and losing their home to legal costs." The state of Michigan filed a civil lawsuit against the HOA to recover the lake for public ownership, using our evidence as the foundation of their case. The lawsuit revealed that the Blackwood family's fake quitclaim deed wasn't just fraud, it was part of a pattern of illegal lake privatizations across the state that had stolen millions of dollars in public, recreational resources from Michigan residents. But the sweetest moment came 3 months later, when the state officially transferred ownership of Willowbrook Lake back to public control. The ceremony was held on a sunny Saturday morning, with the governor present to sign the papers that returned the lake to the people of Michigan. Sarah was invited to cut the ribbon on the new public access signs that replaced Karen's private property, residents only, warnings. The new signs read, "Willowbrook Lake Public Recreation Area, open to all Michigan residents, environmental restoration by Dr. Sarah Williams, lead conservation scientist." Carlos, Mrs. Chen, and our neighbors gathered around as Sarah cast her first legal line as a Michigan resident, using a public lake that had always belonged to the people. No HOA permission required. No fake environmental assessments. No threat of $50,000 fines for the crime of fishing while black. The financial justice was even more satisfying. The civil lawsuit against Karen and Robert resulted in a $1.8 million judgment, covering all the stolen public funds, fraudulent fines, and punitive damages for 37 years of fraud. The HOA was forced to refund every bogus fine they'd collected from minority residents, plus interest and legal expenses. Carlos got his $11,400 back with interest, totaling $14,200. Mrs. Chen received $12,800 for her fraudulent citations. Every family that had been targeted by Karen's discriminatory enforcement received full restitution, plus additional compensation for harassment and emotional distress. Sarah and I received $87,000. The $50,000 fake environmental fine, plus damages for wrongful arrest, identity theft, and the legal costs of proving our innocence. We used the money to buy something special: the actual lake usage rights for Willowbrook Lake, purchased directly from the state for $75,000. Not ownership, the lake remained public property, but the exclusive contract to manage environmental protection and conservation education for the next 25 years. Karen's deposition video became required viewing in law schools as an example of how systemic fraud unravels under proper investigation. Watching her admit to forging documents, stealing public money, targeting families based on race, and framing an innocent woman for crimes she committed herself was deeply satisfying. The audio quality was crystal clear thanks to Mrs. Chen's surveillance equipment, and Karen's lawyer looked physically sick as his client confessed to federal crimes on the record. Did you file false environmental reports in order to collect fraudulent fines from minority residents? Sarah's attorney asked during the deposition. Yes, Karen replied in a flat voice. Did you forge government documents claiming ownership of public property? Yes. Did you open bank accounts using stolen identity information belonging to Dr. Sarah Williams? Yes. Did you specifically target Dr. Williams because of her race and professional expertise? Karen paused for a long moment, looked directly into the camera and said, Yes, I did all of it. I'm guilty of everything you're accusing me of. The criminal trial lasted 6 days. Karen received 15 years in federal prison for conspiracy, fraud, identity theft, and civil rights violations. Robert got 7 years for his cooperation with the investigation. Both were ordered to pay full restitution and banned from serving in any HOA leadership role for the rest of their lives. But the best revenge was what happened to Willowbrook Estates itself. With Karen gone and the lake returned to public ownership, the neighborhood became genuinely welcoming for the first time in decades. The new HOA board, led by Carlos Mendez as president and Mrs. Chen as treasurer, focused on actual community improvement instead of discriminatory enforcement. Property values increased 23% once the legal cloud was lifted and the lake's public access was restored. The neighborhood newsletter started featuring stories about successful residents instead of violation warnings. The annual community picnic expanded from a tense gathering of 30 people to a celebration that drew over 200 families from across the county. Sarah was promoted to Regional Environmental Director for the state, with responsibility for investigating fraudulent environmental claims across Michigan. Her first official act was creating a hotline for residents to report suspicious HOA environmental violations. Her second was establishing mandatory scientific review for any environmental fine over $1,000. I started a nonprofit organization called HOA Accountability that helps families document and fight discriminatory enforcement. We've assisted 17 families in the past year, and we haven't lost a single case. Turns out, when you combine proper evidence gathering with actual legal expertise, HOA bullies tend to fold pretty quickly. The final twist came on the 1-year anniversary of Sarah's first fishing citation. We organized the inaugural Willowbrook Lake Community Fishing Tournament, open to all Michigan residents, regardless of race, religion, or neighborhood affiliation. Over 400 people showed up, including families from all 17 communities where the Blackwood fraud scheme had operated. Sarah caught the biggest bass of the day, a 4-pound largemouth that she released back into the crystal clear water she'd helped restore. As we watched it swim away, she turned to me and smiled. You know what the best part is, Marcus? That fish is swimming in a lake that belongs to everyone now. No HOA Karen will ever again have the power to tell anyone they don't belong here. Sometimes the fight isn't just about winning. Sometimes it's about making sure the next family doesn't have to fight at all.